Hello. In this short video, I am going to explain how unemployment, employment, and participation rates are calculated in the Canadian economy. Let me discuss the labor force characteristics. So these are the five important characteristics, and we are going to discuss uh, each of them one by one. So the total population of a country is divided into two segments or two parts. The first one is what we call the working age population. We call it WAP. And the other part is not working age population. The working age population, that is WAP, does not include population under 15 years of age. So all of those who are above, who are 15 or above, are included in working age population. Working age population does not include those people who are living on reserves, that is indigenous population of people, full-time members of the regular armed forces, and persons living in institutions, including inmates of penal institutions and patients in hospitals and nursing homes. So all these people are not included in working age population. Once we have working age population, and I'll give you a data and I show you how to calculate these three rates. By labor force, I mean members of the working age population who are either employed or unemployed. So there are only two possibilities. If you are in the labor force, then either you are working or you are looking for work. So either you are employed or unemployed. Not in labor force. So members, basically it includes those members of the working age population who are neither employed nor unemployed. So who are not working and not looking for work. For example, full-time students who are not looking for part-time employment. If full-time students are looking for part-time employment, they are considered in the labor force because they are unemployed. Why? Because they're looking for part-time employment. Then we have employed. So those in the labor force and paid employments. So employment, I mean that those workers who are in the labor force and are working. And by working, I mean they have paid employment. They are working against income. By unemployed, I mean those, of course, they are also in the labor force. These workers are also a part of labor force. And these workers are actively seeking employment, but not in paid employment. So for example, if I am not looking for a job, then I'm not even considered in the labor force. So I'm not in the labor force. But if I am looking for a job, then I am considered as unemployed worker and I am a part of labor force. So I'm included in the labor force. Once you know all these characteristics, all these definitions, that is working age population, labor force, not in labor force, employed, and unemployed. And remember, there are two categories for employed workers. Uh, First one is that those who are working full time, the other, those who are working part time. So in employment, we have full time workers and part time workers. For unemployed, we have unemployed workers. Once you know this, then let me show you how we calculate these three ratios using this simple example. So suppose the population, that is total population of the country, is 40 million. Working age population is 32.6 million. So I have excluded all those who are below 15 years of age, who are in armed forces or living on reserves. All these people are subtracted from the actual total population to get working age population. So working age population is 32.6 million people. Out of this working age population, 21.4 million people are in the labor force. It means 21.4 million people are either employed or looking for work. Unemployment, this is not unemployment rate, this is unemployed workers. So there are 1.2 million workers who are actively looking for employment. Employment does not mean employment rate. Employment means number of persons who are, or workers who are employed. So total unemployed, employed workers are 20.2 million workers. Remember, I told you that there are two types of employment, full-time and part-time. So full-time employment equals 1.6 million. So 1.6 million workers are working on full-time basis, and 3.6 million people are working on part-time basis. So we have employment, full employment, part-time employment. Then we have unemployment, not rate, number of workers unemployed. And then we have labor force, working age population, and population. Once you have this data, then this is the formula that we use to calculate unemployment rate. So unemployment rate is equal to number of persons or workers unemployed who are in the labor force. So that is basically 1.2 million workers. They are unemployed because they are actively looking for work. And we divide this by labor force. So what percentage of labor force are unemployed? This is what we call unemployment rate. So 1.2 million workers are unemployed out of 21.4 million labor force times 100. So 1.2 divided by 21.4 times 100, I get 5.61%. It means 5.61% is unemployment rate in this country. How do we calculate employment rate? Remember, employment rate does not mean that you just subtract unemployment rate from 100 and the remaining percentage would be termed as employment rate. When we calculate employment rate, we considered working age population in the denominator. That is, we want to see what percentage of working age population are employed. So this is the formula. So first we take number of employed workers, including both full-time and part-time workers. So this is 20.2 million workers. They are employed either full-time or part-time. And then we divide by not labor force, but working age population. That is 32.6 million. So 20.2 million divided by 32.6 million times 100, I get 62%. So 62% is employment rate. By employment rate, I mean 62% of the working age population is employed, either full-time or part-time. And then the third rate is participation rate. By participation rate, I mean that what percentage of labor force, what percentage of, working age population are in labor force. That is the meaning of participation rate. That is, what percentage of the working age population who are in the labor force, whether they are employed or unemployed. So the formula would be labor force divided by working age population. That is 21.4 4 million workers in the labor force, and then we divide this by working age population, that is 32.6 million. So 21.4 divided by 32.6 times 100 will give you 65.6%. That is 65.6% of the working age population, that is who are above 15 years, 15 and above, and not in armed forces or living on reserves, are actually in the labor force. That is, they are either working or they're actively looking for employment. So this is how we calculate unemployment rate, employment rate, and participation rate. Now, just take this another example where I have actually changed the labor force. If you look at the data, I have added one additional information in this question. First, let me read this question. Suppose 0.2 million full-time students who are not looking for part-time employment. So these full-time students, they were not initially looking for employment. It means these students, these 0.2 million students, must be included in not in labor force category. They are not in labor force. Why? Because they were not looking for employment. They were full-time students. But suppose that these 0.2 million full-time students who are not looking for part-time employment are now starting to look for a part-time job. What would happen? It means that these 0.2 million full-time students, now they are moving from not in labor force category to labor force category, because now they are actively looking for employment, though part-time. So what would happen? That this labor force will increase from 21.4 million people to 21.6 million people. That is, we just added 0.2 million people in the labor force. From where are they coming? They are coming from not in labor force category, which is not given in this data. So we still have a population of total 40 million, working age population 32.6, but now we have a labor force of 21.6 million instead of 21.4 million. And in the question, I told you that these full-time students, these 0.5 million full-time students, they are now actively looking for employment. It means they are unemployed. That is why they are looking for employment. So unemployment, that is unemployed workers, will also increase from 1.2 million people to 1.4 million workers. Why 0.2? Because those 0.2 million students are actually joining labor force and actively looking for employment. There's no change in employment because they're still looking for in the question. If you calculate the same three ratios, notice that the unemployment rate will change. So initially in the previous slide, the unemployment rate was 5.61% that I showed you in black. So this is the old figure without this movement of 0.2 million workers from not in labor force category to labor force category. But now if you calculate the unemployment rate by taking 1.4 million number of unemployed workers divided by 21.6 million labor force, you get 6.5%. So notice unemployment rate has gone up from 5.61% to 6.5%. Why? Because now people who are in the not in labor force category, they are moving to labor force category and they start looking for employment. That is why unemployment rate will increase from 5.61 to 6.5%. Employment rate, there'll be no change. Why? Because there's no change in working age population and there's no change in number of workers employed. So employment rate will still be 62%. So if unemployment rate is increasing, it does not always mean that employment rate will be decreasing. Not necessarily true. And then participation rate, since the labor force data changes. So labor force, we had earlier 21.4 million. Now we have 21.6 million. So this participation rate would also change. So notice that instead of writing 21.4, now I write 21.6 million divided by same 32.6 because there's no change in working age population. So labor force participation or participation rate, same thing. Sometimes you call it labor force participation, but participation rate is fine as well. So participation rate would be 66.3. Notice participation rate has also gone up from 65 to 66%. Why? Because now we have more labor force. Why we have more labor force? Because workers in the not in labor force category, for example, full-time students or retired people, now they are coming back to the labor force and they wanted to work. That is why participation rate has gone up. Now, for the official unemployment rate that I just showed you how to calculate, that is the number of unemployed workers divided by labor force. This measure has a number of issues, and these are discussed in this slide. The reported unemployment rate may be understated simply because part-timers are included as full-timers. So even if you are working a couple of hours a week, you will be considered employed workers, and therefore you will not be included in the measurement of unemployment rate. So unemployment rate will be higher, or will be, sorry, lower. Why? Because you are considered as employed, although you are working just few hours a week. So that is the problem with unemployment rate, that unemployment rate is basically understated. It should have been slightly higher if you consider part-time workers as partly unemployed. Let me put this way. This rate is also underestimated because it excludes discouraged workers. What are discouraged workers? Those who want work but are not seeking it, believing that no opportunities exist. So sometimes what happens that workers in the labor force, they are actively looking for employment, but with the passage of time, if they know that they're not going to get employment, they move, they change their status basically. So they move from labor force category to not in labor force category and become, let's say, full-time students. So initially they were looking for work, but when they couldn't find, they just go and join a college and study for another year. So these are not included in unemployment figure because we don't include discouraged workers in the unemployment, in the calculation of unemployment rate. But technically, they're also unemployed. Sometimes this rate is overstated because of false information from some employment insurance recipients. So some workers, maybe they are working on cash and they are just showing the tax authorities that they are not working to the government, and so government doesn't know that they are working, and in order to just receive employment insurance. So basically you are including them as unemployed because they are receiving employment insurance, but they're actually working. So your unemployment rate will be slightly higher what it should have been. Overstated, once again, because of false information from those working in the underground economy. So those who are working illegally or in the underground economy, they just don't report their income just to evade taxes or avoid evade basically taxes. So they will be considered as unemployed, although they are working. So these are the four important concerns as far as unemployment rate is concerned. Thank you.